Hello, students. So today we're going to talk about the 6 classes of fishes, and we've made the jump from the invertebrates to the vertebrates, and now this is really the first group of vertebrates, the chordates that we'll talk about here. And when we look at the 6 different classes, one of the things I want you to make sure you're paying attention to is when we start them, we're going to start them off with the most basic, the least evolved organisms, get to the most evolved organisms, and there's a couple of leftover organisms at the bottom. But just looking at the evolutionary trends here of the fish. As we start here, we're looking at phylum Chordata, and we started this last week. The idea that all chordates at some point have a dorsal hollow nerve cord. For us, the nerve cord turns into the spinal cord. We have a post-anal tail. All chordates have a tail. Yes, we do as well. It's 5 small bones at the bottom of our spinal cord. We have a notochord at some point in our life cycle. The notochord for us will evolve into the vertebrae that protect our nerve cord. We're all bilaterally symmetrical. So in other words, there's a complete right and a left side of a chordate. We have more than 2 cell layers, or what we call germ layers, and most of us will undergo sexual reproduction. So these are the basics of what a chordate has. There's a couple of subphylum that belong to the chordates here, the subphylum Vertebrata or the Craniata. Cranium means head, so there's a skull portion here. That skull may or may not be made out of bone, as you'll see in the some of the cartilaginous fish where their skeleton's made out of cartilage. But for the most part, the vertebrates, the craniates, are animals with a skull, okay? Some sort of tissue that is harder than a muscle that encases the brain. It protects the brain. We're well beyond the point now where animals are centralized with a brain and spinal cord. Animals, and those are cephalocyzed in some sort of head or brain structure. So the craniates also have a brain, sensory organs, and a skull, and complex digestive systems with a coelom. So again, we've evolved quite a bit here, going from organisms with zero organization to organisms that are starting to really have skeletal structures here, and internal skeletal structures. The first class we'll look at here are called the Myxines or the hagfish. These are barely fish at all. Okay, they're jawless. They don't have a jaw. They look like big giant worms, but they have a skull, so they've got to fit into the craniates somewhere. So the skull here, there's no backbone. There's 3 hearts to it, which is very, very unique. Doesn't have a stomach. The cartilage that makes it up is made out of the skeleton is made out of cartilage, and there's really not anything. This is kind of the outlier here. They're vertebrates because they do have a vertebrae. They're craniates because they have a skull, but that's about it. I mean, they are the outliers here. They can change their sex from year to year. They have no larvae. They're virtually blind. These guys are scavengers. If you ever watch a National Geographic video on whales and sharks that die in the water, as those whales and sharks decompose on the seafloor, these animals here, the hagfish, these are the ones that really break down their skeleton. They're excellent scavengers. Okay, so we'll go on to the next one here. The lampreys. These are the jawless fish. Now, again, going back to some of the evolutionary trends, still don't have a jaw yet, but now we have a complete skull. We have the beginnings of a vertebrae or the vertebral column. We start seeing a cartilaginous skeleton. We see the ability to live in salt and fresh water. So we go from this creature here that barely makes the definition of a craniate, and now we go to the next step. Now we've got a complete skull. We see the beginnings of a vertebrae. Again, we're making these evolutionary trends. This is the jaw or the sucker of a lamprey. Very, very nasty organism. Again, scavengers, decomposers living at the bottom of the ocean. Now we get into the ones that you're familiar with. When you think of a fish, when you think of a shark or a skate or a ray, these are the animals. Okay, the first one we'll talk about are class chondriichthyans. The chondriichthyes are your cartilaginous fish. Okay, a shark, a devil ray or a ray, and a skate. All these guys have complete. They have jaws, makes them better hunters. We know that the teeth of the shark are inward facing, so if you get bitten by a shark, it's not going to let you go unless it wants to. Paired fins, a full cartilaginous skeleton. So the skeleton of this shark is full and complete, made out of cartilage. Okay, it's a soft body. This ray, again, a full skeleton made out of cartilage. No bones, no rib cages, very flexible, very leathery skin. Probably gives a lot of, it kind of makes up for the fact that the skeleton is a little softer. It has very, very thick, very tough skin. So it does kind of make up for some of that softness on the inside. Complex heart, various chambers. Some of these guys are going to have 3-chambered hearts. Some of these guys are going to have 2-chambered hearts. Okay, but again, we make that next step up. We go from again a creature that barely meets the definition of having a backbone and a skull to one that has a complete skull and the beginnings of a backbone. And now we go to the cartilaginous organisms that have complete skeletons, but they're made out of cartilage. They're a little bit softer, but they are the next step up evolutionary-wise. Then we get to the next one. Okay, I'll skip that one there. The bony fish. If you go swimming in Lake Tazewell, or if you go fishing in St. Chris Lake, these are the fish that you're fishing for. Okay, have bone instead of cartilage, so they have full, complete skeletons, but every bone is filled in with bone. Okay, every bone of that skeleton is completely hard and filled in with bone cells. Paired fins, like we had before. The skin is a little bit different. Instead of being leathery and hard, the bony fish have scales. And that makes sense because if it has an internal skeleton to protect it, that is hard and it protects the brain and the spinal cord, you don't need to have that leathery skin. So you can have different scales here. And these are really good at for camouflage, for blending into your environment. A unique organism that fish have is called the lateral line. Okay, the lateral line is great for equilibrium. And a unique characteristic, if you ever catch a fish and you're doing catch and carry, where you catch the fish and then let it go, you never want to throw the fish in the water to where it lands on its side. The reason why, if that fish lands on that lateral line, it can mess up that fish's equilibrium and it will die very quickly. Okay, you always want to be gentle with the fish when you put it back in the water to make sure you don't mess up the lateral line. Be the same kind of difference. If someone pushes you off a 10 foot, out of a tree at 10 feet, whatever, and you land on your backbone. Okay, that's going to mess up your equilibrium and it could possibly kill you. Jaws, swim bladder, and an operculum. Okay, this structure here that protects the gills, very, very unique. Okay, so your bony fish. The ray-finned fishes, okay, very, very similar, very ornate colors, okay, paired fins that are supported by spine-like rays. So you look at all these little spines here that come up, okay, right there. And these guys are nasty. If you ever get stuck by one of these spines, some of them are venomous, some of them are very sharp. They go into your skin very deep. If you've ever been spined by a catfish, it hurts very much, and these are no different. Okay, so very similar to the bony fish. It's just their fins are designed a little bit differently. That puts them in a different class of organisms. These other two here are called the coelacanth. Okay, these guys are unique because they kind of, from an evolutionary standpoint, if you look down here, paired lobed fins that move in an alternating pattern similar to legs. If you were to think of the organism that, if you're a fish and your next evolutionary step is to walk on water, or walk on land, I should say, this is the organism that makes that step. Okay, these are very, very rare. I think the last one that's been seen in the wild was like 20 years ago in the Indian Ocean. But these guys, as they move, they've got fins so they can swim a little bit, but they are better off walking, using their fins to walk on the ocean floor. Very, very unique structures. Only 2 living species of these guys. And again, look at that bottom one. Gives rise to the amphibians and the land vertebrates. There's a really good video that we usually watch in class that shows basically the jump from water, from organisms like this that can use their fins instead of swimming, use their fins to walk on the water, and then they make that jump to the land with as amphibians. And the last one, again, we talk about evolutionary trends, the lungfish. Okay, every fish we've talked about, these guys use gills. They filter out the water through gills. The lungfish, okay, have lungs. These guys are the next evolutionary trends. They look like lampreys here. They've got a full skull, full skeleton, full vertebral column, but they've got lungs. Okay, so they have to live in very, very shallow water, so that they can always come up to the water, to the surface, and get oxygen. So these last 2 guys, the coelacanths, okay, and the dipnoids, the lungfish here, are the next evolutionary trends that get into amphibians. And if you look at the skin here of that lungfish, this is what an amphibian looks like: a moist, very smooth, very moist skin. All you got to do is put some legs on this guy here, and you got yourself a salamander. Okay, and that's going to be a pretty big deal here when we talk about amphibians and reptiles next week. And those are our fishes.